Hi, and welcome to another edition of Seniors Today. I'm Tom Barty, your host, and our special guest today is former Mayor Tony Intintoli, who is a board member of the Water Emergency Transportation Authority.
And
Welcome.
a senior.
Oh, and he's also a senior. Totally qualified for our show.
Yes.
So thanks for being here today.
Pleasure.
I know we've had you on before.
Yes, you have.
Jackie tells me we've been doing this show for 7 or 8 years now, something like that.
Yes.
So I'm not dating you.
No.
But, and of course I wouldn't date you, you're not my type. But
I'm not going to go into
yeah.
that.
Anyway, thanks again for being here today.
Yeah,
So,
pleasure.
you know, a lot of changes have happened with the ferry and the Water Emergency Transportation Authority.
Yes.
And so we're always glad to have you here to give us updates on what's going on.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm be glad to fill you in on what's going on.
So,
So what's going on?
yeah, what is going on?
Well, a huge expansion program for the existing services. Our core services, we have four, as you know, we have four routes. There's Oakland, Alameda, South San Francisco, and Vallejo. And we're on a program of meeting demand, which has expanded hugely over the last, I would say, 6 or 7 years. It's gone up about 70–80%. And Vallejo now, at peak hours, we are running about 95% full, which means that during those peak hours, there are occasionally times when people have to wait for the next ferry, which is not a good thing. So the intention, what we've been doing, is planning for the expansion over the last couple of years. And in 2015, we started a program of building and purchasing 7 new boats. We had 12 when we made that decision. We decided that we needed to meet the demand that we were anticipating, which actually did happen, that we needed those boats. Of those 7, 4 of them are intended for the Central Bay service, which would be Alameda, Oakland, South San Francisco, that area. And 3 boats would be for the north part of the service, which is Vallejo and will be Richmond next year. We'll be opening a new service in Richmond at the end of 2018. So for that service and to meet the demand in Vallejo, the increasing demand in Vallejo, we started the process of building 3 new boats. They are the large class boats. They're significantly larger than the ones in the Central Bay. And they are beautiful. They're beautiful boats. The first of those boats will be delivered at the end of 2018. That is for the northern service. And the others will follow shortly thereafter. They're all in various stages of construction. 2 have been delivered of the boats that we ordered, the 4 for the Central Bay. 2 were delivered this year, within the last 2 or 3 months.
Is that included in the 7?
That's included in the 7. So we have 5 more to go. Another few months we'll have the other 2 for the Central Bay, and the construction is going on for the other 3. So it's exciting. The challenge, I think, Tom, is to meet the demand first of the services we currently run, which is our base service, and then consider new services as the finances become possible. Right now, it costs about $40 million a year to run the 4 services that we have. Half of that money comes from the fare box, approximately, and half from the bridge tolls. So that's your $40 million. To operate new services, we'd have to be able to identify new new funds to operate, not just new funds to build boats, which we'd have to do, new funds to build terminals, which we would have to do, but even beyond that is the need to identify the money that it needs to operate, because as I've said, the cost of new service would be, we would hope at some point would reach the level where at least half the money would come from the fare box, but there's always going to be a significant public subsidy. All public transportation has that kind of subsidy. The buses, for example, it's more typically 75 cents on the dollar is subsidized. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission requires that new ferry routes within a relatively short period of time, 4 or 5 years, reach at least 40 cents on the dollar from fare box. So I'm all in favor of increasing the scope of ferry service in the Bay Area, but I'm equally concerned that we identify the necessary funding before we build things that we can't operate or may not be able to operate. So that's what we're doing. I could go on like this, but why don't I wait for another question?
I have a ton of questions.
Yeah.
The first one is the new beautiful boats that are on their way. Will they carry 300 and more?
Oh, yes.
Is it a higher figure than
It's
that?
a higher than figure. It's around 450.
450?
Yeah, something like that.
So that's 100 more than the boats can carry now.
I think that's correct.
Okay, and are they longer and wider, or?
No, excuse me. They may be somewhat larger to accommodate that, but a lot has to do with the size of the engines and the engineering that goes into the construction of the boats.
And how much do they cost each?
Oh,
The big ones, 25 million?
I'm so glad you asked.
Oh, okay.
Because it makes the point that
Yeah.
the boats run about 20, the big boats, the ones that service our area, are 20 to 25 million. The smaller boats maybe are 10 million less, you know.
And those new boats, they require engine maintenance and rehabilitation every 3-4 years?
Well, they require regular maintenance, and then typically you have their life, so to speak, their useful life is about 30 years, 25 to 30 years. And at the midpoint, they undergo a really major rehab. I wish I could have that kind of rehab. But the Intintoli, for example, that particular boat went under that kind of rehab recently at a significant amount of money, but it looks a whole lot better than it did before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure a facelift will be less than $1 million. So
We'll see.
we'll see if we can work that into
All
the
right,
budget
we'll
for
do
next
that.
year.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the Richmond, they've been talking about Richmond for a long time.
Yeah.
And I was just curious how they have analyzed the
Well, here-
impact of that service on the ridership on the other ferries.
It's not going to, we don't anticipate, based on any studies that have been done, any significant impact on the Vallejo ferry, which is my major concern, or on the other ferry services. The Richmond started a service several years ago, and it lasted only a year. I think that's true. The reason was they didn't have a boat that was fast enough, and that was the major issue. The boats that we've constructed or are in construction for Richmond will cut significant amount of time over what they had originally been doing. So how we came to a decision to do Richmond versus the other cities in Contra Costa that had indicated an interest, for example, Pinole, Hercules, Martinez, Antioch, all of in that county that had expressed an interest. The way we came down to, well, we think we can do Richmond, is because the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, which plans for transportation issues, all kinds of transportation issues within that county, did what they called a white paper. And they studied the various locations, the ridership. They did ridership studies, to figure out whether once we operated, how long it should take before we can get to the 40% return on the cost, and so forth. They did that analysis, and all of the jurisdictions in Contra Costa County had a say in that. They contributed to it. They argued their position and so forth. And that agency, composed much like the Solano Transportation Authority. In our case, it's like the 7 mayors and the county, a representative from the county. They had similar representation from the various cities and so forth in the county. And they came up with Richmond as the most viable candidate. Mm-hmm. And they were able to make some significant financial commitments to it. So they having a transportation tax measure and that we don't have, but that county does. So they were able to put together a recommendation to our board, to the Water Transportation Authority, saying that this is where they thought the money should go, this is where the investment should go, versus some other place in the county. And so we did. And we're anticipating the opening of that service we had the groundbreaking about a month ago, as you probably heard, and the actual opening of the service we're anticipating will be in the late fall of 2018, about the same time that the first of those boats will arrive. I read an article recently that about the ferries. I've forgotten who put it together, but they made the point that there was an article about a lot of aspects of transportation in the Bay Area. And one of the things they said was, in this article, was that there's no short-term plan for expanding the Vallejo ferry service. Well, they were talking about ferry service in general, but they meant the Vallejo ferry service as well, and I think they mentioned this. Well, the fact is there is a plan, as I've indicated, and we anticipate having the first boats for that in late 2018, 2019. So it's not short range in terms of less than 6 months, but it is in the works. And our ultimate objective, if the funding becomes available, and that's a big if, is to have service that runs on a 15-minute schedule. Rather than the current schedule, which is more like if you miss the boat, you wait an hour. And that's probably not totally accurate, maybe a little less than that, and so the time's a little longer, but in that neighborhood. And when you're running a service that's a regular commute service, you want it to be as frequent as possible and to meet the demand. So that's what we're doing. The other thing that we have to do, which for Vallejo is not as much of a critical situation as it is in Alameda, where we've got equally expanding ridership and very limited parking, and we're working on various ways to address that. But in Vallejo, there's been a lot of planning to deal with that and to deal with the parking issues. And as you know, the current council is proceeding with that. And the objective is to open a new parking phase that will be located where the current post office is located. So if we do that and we add the boats that are coming at the end of 2018, 2019, we should be able to have a very robust service for Vallejo. And as I say, to me, the most important thing is to meet the demand that you currently have for the current services you're operating before you look to open things that unless you know there is new funding, then it's okay. Because if there is not new funding, it's like any business that operates, that tries to expand without adequate financing, and we know what happens then.
So RM3, Regional Measure 3, will be a bond issue that the public will have a chance to vote on.
They'll be voting on RM3. The legislature in the proposal, RM3, has put in a significant amount of funding for ferry service. That has gone through the legislature very recently, as you know. And if it passes, it certainly will provide the funding for a lot of what they're hoping to be able to do. And then, of course, it's up to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, if it does pass, to decide how much the increase in bridge tolls will be, and over what period of time. Mm-hmm. So it'll affect. There'll be a lot of players affecting what our little agency does, that are currently funding us.
Well, I know, I don't know what the ridership is, but it's like maybe 1 million people a year.
It's it's like very big. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you think about having that many people on Highway 80.
Oh yeah,
and if you've definitely.
And if you've driven Highway 80, which I did yesterday, it's impossible. I mean, I mean, you can't. I have friends, relatives, everybody. We all have that in the Bay Area that I don't see very often, because the thought of getting on the road, you know, because they're not located near ferry service, mm-hmm. the thought of getting on the road is a nightmare to me. And the idea of getting on and then trying to go to Oakland, and even just that. It used to be when I first came here in 1965. When I first came, you could go to Sacramento. You get in the car, and man, you were there in 50 minutes, 40 minutes. Mm-hmm. You know, now you don't know how long it's going to take, but it's going to be a lot longer than that. And leaving now, you know, you don't even. Yesterday, I was visiting in Belmont. And I thought, I can't. They said, we'd like to have you stay for early dinner. I said, I can't. I got to leave at 1 o'clock because if I wait till 4 or 5 or 6, I won't get home.
Well, you have to wait till 8 to get back on the
freeway.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, just to get on it.
Yeah.
You know, well, and it's affecting bus service and all that, because, you know, mm-hmm. we used to be able to use bus service, and we still do when something happens with the ferries, which is rare, fortunately. But when something does happen, we have to have ferry service. But people prefer, even if they've missed a ferry, they prefer to wait till the next ferry, however long it is, because it takes 20-25 minutes just to get from the ferry building to the bridge in San Francisco. And then they've got all that traffic in Berkeley, and that awful, I don't know why that can't be solved, but that awful bottleneck that occurs right there at Berkeley. Mm-hmm. You know? You hit that and you think, oh my God, when am I going to get through this?
It's almost 24 hours a day.
Oh yes,
in there.
Yeah. Now yesterday, I have to say, you leave, let's say the airport. If you arrive in the early afternoon, around 1 o'clock, you can get to Vallejo still by 2:30, 2:15, 2:30, because that's the time when it's the midday. Mm-hmm. But either end of that, and you're in trouble.
So there's a group of elected officials that meet probably 6 times a year to discuss Highway 37 and the mm-hmm. future of Highway mm-hmm. 37.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar with that.
You know, obviously Highway 37 is probably worse than Highway 80 at certain times of the day.
Yes.
And so they're trying to come up with whatever solutions they can to ease that problem. And some of them might be shorter term, some of them are longer term, including mm-hmm. potentially having a toll road there.
Yeah.
Down the road a ways. Mm-hmm. But they've discussed rail options. Mm-hmm. There's the old Northwestern Pacific line.
I certainly hope they're looking at those things.
Yeah. But one of the things that they brought up
is the ferry.
Is a ferry to San Rafael.
Yeah.
And can you?
Yeah. Let me talk about. Let me talk about it. I've heard of it recently. It's like any other proposal that is made for expansion of the ferry service. I think it should be fed into the as I mentioned, when we opened the Richmond service, a lot had to do with Contra Costa, their transportation council, looking at that and deciding, measuring against all the other expenditures and things that are planned, and deciding that this is where we want to go. There's something similar going on for Solano County, and that is a white paper that's being prepared by the Solano Transportation Authority, that's Darrell Halls and all the, he's the CEO, and as you know, and all the mayors, and Jim Spearing from the county chairing it. In any event, they're looking at the same thing. They're doing a study of water transportation in Solano County. Now that, to me, that's water transportation for Solano County. So I think that should be looked at by them as well. Our part in that is the water transportation, the San Francisco Water Transportation Authority, Emergency Transportation Authority. Our part in that would be the same as what we did for Contra Costa County, which is we participated, we did, through consultants and so forth, the ridership studies to determine what the ridership possibly would be, what the cost would be of related to construction of facilities, if any, the cost of operating, of acquiring boats, and then the cost of maintaining it, of the operational costs. So I think it should get the same sort of treatment that any of the other proposals that are made. We ought to start with the body that can represent the various competing interests and has the resources to do the necessary studies, come up with a suggestion, and then from my point of view, the WETA, the board I'm on, should be receptive in terms of receiving this information and then making a decision. In the case of Richmond, it was not a difficult decision because we were aided by all the work that had been done by the local jurisdictions. So in this case, it would be the same sort of situation. What are the other things you want, and how will we finance them? One of the things that, as you know, because you've been there and you've been a supporter in the past, one of the things that's made things possible in various places is the fact they can make some contribution locally to these efforts. And unfortunately, Solano County is the only county in the Bay Area that does not have a sales tax for transportation, and therefore nothing written into it for anything, roads, ferries, or anything. And that gives a little bit it adds one more thing that you can say, well, we have this fund that we can look to for if we have a down year, if the cost of fuel goes crazy. Because one of the things that makes Vallejo uses half the money now that we have for the total ferry service, 20 million out of 40 million, roughly, to operate every year. That's going to be the same situation. We've got to look to that because a new service that would go from here to San Rafael would be of the same sort of length. And what drives the cost up for us is the length of the trip affects the size of the boat and how much fuel you use. So it's a very interesting proposal, but I would say it should go through the same process we've done with the others. So
the Vallejo would be the embarking location, and somewhere in San Rafael would be the destination, and that would be an effort to relieve congestion on probably 580 and 37. Yes. Was there any talk about contributions from Marin County?
Well, we haven't gotten to that. We haven't gotten to that.
Mm-hmm. No. You mentioned earlier that the fare box return is up to 50%, and I remember years ago, it was in the 30s, wasn't it? When
yeah,
the ferry first started?
Well, yes. In fact, when it originally started, as you know, it started as a service originally for Marine World. It was, I think, originally the idea of the people who owned Marine World, and Mike Demetrius, and probably Terry Curtola. I mean, because I was on the council in that time, in those years, in ancient history. But it started that way, and then when we had the 1989 earthquake, people that started writing it because the bridge was down started demanding, they wanted to continue the service, and we were operating on rented boats from other places. We had rented a boat, I've forgotten where we got them, but we rented boats from other
The red and white fleet.
Yeah, yeah.
Something like that.
That's right, red and white fleet.
Mhm.
So, so that's how it started. But when in its early years, there was an attempt to shut it down.
Mhm.
If you will, because we were at like 30% fare box return and huge and very large subsidy. So there was clamoring. Well, the writers on the boat organized, and they convinced MTC, not MTC, the Public Utilities Commission, that handles the licensing for these public services, to back off. They went to PUC and said, we want this service to continue. We know it can be made successful, it just takes time. And so they did, and it worked.
Well, that's great news.
Yeah.
And, you know, the higher the fare box return, the greater the viability of the service. And
Yes.
a lot of things related
And
to
now
that.
it's well above, you know, anything close to 30%. It's at
So
times.
we have less than a minute left in the show,
Yes, what a shame.
and yeah, sorry to break the news to
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Can you just give us a quick rundown of what the fares are right now for the categories? And seniors get a discount too, right?
As we should.
Yes.
May I say we've earned it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yes, the fare box, I mean, the fares to San Francisco and return now, the seniors get half price, so we pay $14.20. I think it's maybe 30 cents, but anyway, 14 approximately, round trip. On the other end of it, if you buy a ticket and you're not taking the advantage of, I always forget the name of the Clipper
Clipper
card.
card.
If you take a Clipper card, there's a cut. If you take a monthly pass, there's a cut. But a daily pass is expensive. It's, you know.
So besides being convenient and
Yes.
efficient,
Yes.
it's also fun.
It's
a great
fun,
ride.
it's healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't fret, you don't have this terrible tension and pressure
From traffic.
and you get on and you sit down and you have your drink, and your coffee and your whatever.
Well, I'll drink to that.
All right. Very good.
Well, we actually, I'm sorry, but we've run out of time for
It's a
today.
shame.
But because of that, we'll have you back again sooner.
All right, that's very good. Thank you very much, Tom.
So thank you for being here.
You're quite welcome.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Our show airs at 6 p.m. on Tuesday and Thursday at Comcast 27, AT&T UVerse 99, and streaming live video at vcat.tv. Come see us again next time.